Thank you.
So it's not what's in the program? Yeah, she said to you.
That's the network name. The password's journalism. Yep. Got you.
Thank you, Tara.
You're welcome.
Okay. Alex, you want to do
Yes.
roll
Tarquinio here. Fletcher,
Here?
Walsh,
call? Here.
Baker.
Here.
Tarquinio, Gotcha here. McCloskey,
Here.
Gwen McClellan. Here. Mohammed. Godley. Here. Stefan. Here. Allen. Here. Morano. Here. Schatz.
Here.
Gallagher Newberry. Here. Day. Here. Radsky.
Here.
Williams. Here. Gallagher. Here. Hawk.
Here.
Shunk. Here. Paul.
Here.
Womack. Here. There is a little bit.
Jam it out.
Not loud enough to actually recognize the two.
Okay, we'll go ahead and start. I'll start just report of the president. I didn't do anything formal, but I am still keeping track of how often we've been publicly speaking out either to other journalists who ask us for quotes about issues, or when we send press release or been featured in any kind of news organization. So I will make a point to circulate that at some point tonight or tomorrow to circulate kind of the total on that, so that everyone can see that. You know, this year it's been really, really busy, and I'm really grateful just to all of you for your help and support. And I'm really proud of just our being able to respond, I feel like, more quickly, whether it's a local issue, a national issue, a regional issue. And a lot of that has to do with all of you giving national and giving myself a heads up. So I'm really grateful for that. And I hope that that's something, that continues. Because I do think we've sort of gotten into a groove with it. It's not perfect yet by any means, and we can still, make it better. But, it started with fake news during the election. It went to enemies of the people. And then, all sorts of different assaults on some journalists in some cases. And I don't think, unfortunately, as probably all agree, it's probably not stopping anytime soon. So I think we need to continue fighting and pushing, and hopefully all of you will continue to forward those, flash those things, and let us know what we can do. So that's really all I had for my report. We're going to go over a lot of the stuff that we've been working on in more detail. So I'll kind of save that for those action items when they come up. So next we have approval of board meeting minutes. Does anyone have a motion to approve those?
I so move.
I'll second.
I have minor
Okay.
sorry. The first one, and this is just a matter of record in the April meeting in the nominations. It's just a matter of record. It makes no difference, but I had declared at that point, and I remember actually told saying my name, but I was left off the list and declared. And then more importantly, on one of my comments here, it says, though I'm trying to find the page, it has the word delegate when it should be director. I find it actually. Okay, it is the fourth paragraph down after upon proper motion by Newberry and seconded by Stefan. That's actually the third paragraph, second line. There's the word delegates, and it should be directed. So we're talking about board, the appointed board directors, and not chapter delegates. So those are my two corrections.
Okay. Thank you. Bill?
In the minutes of the April 22nd meeting, it says we approve the review of the credit card policy and subject to legal review. I've checked with Joe, has been legally reviewed, and it is now enforced, Joe.
Mhm.
Maybe with the parenthetic. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Matt?
Just a small clarification on the June 14th minutes. It says it was called to order on January 5th, 2017.
Thank you.
early birds.
Tom,
Shorter
Tom,
long meeting, but,
Good catch.
Seemed like they get here.
Anyone else? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the meetings are approved. We move to report of STX Foundation. Robert?
Good afternoon, and to all you East Coasters, welcome to best time zone. It really is, because, you know,
I thought this was the Pacific time zone.
yeah, well,
It's not now?
we're Mountain Standard Time right now, yeah. Because you, I mean, the football games, playoff games, you guys have it at 9 o'clock before they even start. So, anyway, but, I will assume that you've read the entire packet, including my report. I'm not going to get a lot of, repeat everything there. The two main things that that the foundation will be doing tomorrow that you would perhaps have an interest in, is the discussion of, whether we will fight the bullet and fully fund, the general fund call position that we've been talking about for the last 3 years, I think it is by now. Which will require making some other changes and things we do, because, you know, that's something for 100,000 or so a year, something else has to give. Even with our
well done, whoever called it.
Journalist on call.
Yeah, I mean, our bank accounts, our investments are doing very well. Did we hit 13 million?
We never did, got really close, but
Okay, we were 12 days at the end of July, and we're in June, like, within 5 minutes. But anyway, we're real close. So anyway, so that'll be a major discussion. Anyone who wants to come and listen, you're welcome. I'm nothing better to do at 9 o'clock on Friday morning. And then the other, it's not even an action item, but it's also a information item for packet is full magazine. The committee, the foundation, with Ethan and team joining us with the task force. You know, some really great discussion, great ideas on ways to make it a little better. And one of the ways to make it better is to spread it less often and put more resources into the online place. So we can more time in there. That is in the form of a recommendation from that committee to management. And we didn't really think it was an action item as such. But, you know, may I have to take any questions on that or anything else? I'll get out of here.
Any questions for Robert? Yes, Patty.
So, the STX board has taken the lead or directs the quill question. What are you looking for from this board in terms of, what will you accept from this board? Ideas and so forth.
Well, CODA's an interesting animal right now, because when we made the transition, part of the agreement was that the foundation would take on responsibility for quill and the massive amounts of red ink. However, in the bylaws, the SBJ board is still publisher of it. So, I mean, if this board says, we don't want you to reduce quill to 4 issues, you could certainly say so, and I think the foundation board would listen. I mean, any kind of input. I mean, that was one reason we wanted volunteers from the board and team and me to step forward, so that there was SBJ representation beyond the STX committee and looking at. So we wanted a broad section, and most, I mean, particularly folks with magazine experience, was very important to have that discussion. But yeah, if you all have any input on that, I mean, of course we would. We're happy partners here.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Robert. Okay, moving on to number 6 agenda items, staff report. Joe?
yeah. Thanks for coming, everyone. I'm glad you all made it safe and sound, and those of you who came from Florida and the opposing hurricane. Thank you. Just a couple things real quick on staffing. I guess the staffing update, which normally isn't all about staffing, is actually all about staffing. So, but first, before we get started, I want to introduce you to a couple new people, new staff members that we have. So first, I'll just start with Christine Cordial. She's our new programs coordinator, and she'll be working really closely with Abby to do events, awards. We're kind of starting to look at that as a department as opposed to just an awards person and an events person working in silos. So you want to tell everybody about yourself and your hobbies and what you like to do?
I'm Christine. I am not from the journalism world, but I am from the nonprofit world. All right.
Bag stuffing?
Bag stuffing, yeah, a newfound. About 4 weeks in, so I'm thrown into the deep end. It's all working out okay.
Awesome. And then also Anna Gutierrez comes to us from down south. She's our communications intern. You may remember that that used to be a 1-year position. Anna will be the first person to hold that for 2 years. So we're going to try to hopefully leverage that that internship a little bit differently, so we have some more institutional knowledge with communications instead of churning year after year. So. Yes. So tell them a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Anna. I graduated from the University of Texas Arlington in May, where I was editor-in-chief of the student newspaper, The Shorthorn. Applied for this job on a whim, maybe I practiced applying for jobs, and then I got it. So I decided to move to Indianapolis. It's been really great, just started in June, and that's it. I have a dog. Her name is Lily. That's all.
So anyway, you'll see them out and about running around in their staff shirts, but I wanted to make sure you all got to know them before, and you just wondered who are these strangers. So they're ours. Yes, they may still be strangers. So anyway, and you guys can go. I told them that I would make them sit through the whole meeting, and they have work to do. So thank you. So then the other staffing updates, as I mentioned in the packet, the development position and the education position, which are both, we're in the process of filling those spots. The education position, I think we decided pretty early on, it would be filled before my departure in December. We're fairly far along in that process. We haven't offered it to anyone, or we haven't filled it to anyone yet. We hope to tie that up when we get back. The development position we just posted, and that probably will take a little bit longer. The hope is to have somebody in place by early November, late October. And the development position, I know we've talked a lot about what do we want in this position, and we'll continue to talk about that a little bit. But after our August 5 meeting in Indianapolis with Lynn and Robert, I can't remember, Hagit was there, I know. Yeah, Rebecca chimed in for a little bit when she could. She got a flight canceled. But anyway, at that meeting, we kind of decided and kind of came to an agreement on like what we felt like we needed in a development person. So we're going to be looking for somebody who, for one person who has some experience in some major gifts. We think going after individuals is a way to go. The programming side and the partnerships with programming will become a responsibility of the education person. So we're trying to take Chris's job, divide it into 2, and accomplish the same things, but in a smarter way. And so that's the plan on development. So
What happens in the interim between the time Chris leaves and someone else comes on?
yeah, we're going to maintain, we'll do maintenance. So Katie and Chris have been really great. Oh, and Katie Hunt's leaving also. She won't fly back to Indy when we're done here. Right. But so we're going to do the maintenance. We have timelines, we have instructions. Chris is not going to be very far away, so the rest of the staff will just pick up between now and when the new person starts. But no new initiatives between then and now. So, and then the last part of my report is just kind of just some thoughts that I wanted to make sure I shared before I left. And that is just about, a potential roadmap. It should not be the roadmap. It is an idea. But a lot of the things we talked about in that August meeting was the idea of the foundation and SPJ continuing to think as one as opposed to 2. And so when we start talking about strategic planning, I would encourage this board to think about it holistically and in ways that we can accomplish our goals by leveraging the foundation and SPJ's strengths as opposed to SPJ working and then the foundation working. So that little diagram you see, those are my thoughts after that. It's not the only path, but I want to make sure I shared some thoughts before I left. So that's it. That's all I have. Any questions about anything that I didn't talk about, write about?
The education program or education position, Joe?
Yeah.
When advertised, did it list quill editor as one of the?
It did. Yep.
Anyone else have any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, moving on to chapter action. Tara.
Yeah, so we don't have any new chapters to activate at this time. There are several in the works, but none have submitted their paperwork as of this meeting. We do have chapters to inactivate, which usually happens at this meeting because, as many of you know, post-annual reports, RDs, and I, this year mostly Crystal, have conversations about which chapters need to be inactivated. Just a quick reminder, inactivation does not take them out of our ranks forever. It just kind of cleans our garage, puts them in a box, and we can take them back out at any time. Rebecca pointed out those first ones on your list that you see there in your packet that say Region 2, those are Region 1. Our apologies on that. But this is a list of the chapters who are ready to be inactivated. And so it basically just keeps our records clean. I'll take questions on any of them.
Just a quick, I noticed that nursing tourism.
Mhm.
Have you had any communication?
These we have had communication on and off. I will tell you a lot of these are constant struggle chapters, and they are one of them.
Who was that? I'm sorry. What about DePaul, where SPJ was founded?
Yeah, same thing, struggle. They do not have a huge amount of people that can serve in the advisor role. And so for them, it's just one more task, as we know is the case in many of our chapters. But yeah, they can't keep it going. So.
Move
Do
to
members of
approve
the
these.
chap-
I'm sorry, go
Do
ahead.
members of the chapters maintain if they want membership to SPJ, or once the chapter is dissolved? I mean, is there a roadmap for them to stay involved with?
Yeah, so the people who are members will continue their individual membership as if, the chapter never existed. They'll still get their reminders, they'll still be members. The chapter piece of it is just kind of separated out.
I don't know if this is similar to the other chapters, but in Region 6, let's say Marquette and Madison specifically, they're being recruited by the pro chapter in Madison to be members, to remain members and to be at their meetings and do things. And I've not discouraged that, however, said it is important to have student chapters and pro chapters, but pro chapters find some solace in having more members, so they bring students in.
Sarah, how common is it to have these partnership student chapters? Bylaws state that within a 75-mile radius, they can involve students from different campuses. I asked because I was in Cheyenne 2 weeks ago, talking to some college students there, along with the Wyoming Press Association. But they're pretty thin in the numbers in their program, but they're close to University of Wyoming and Laramie and another community college, but they may have some.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, happy to discuss kind of the logistics of where and when at any time, especially with your specifics. But generally, if there are chapters or students and schools that want to get together and form a chapter, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we're pretty lenient when it comes to you want to get together and do SPJ things. That's great. Where we do see challenges is with the logistics, but we have solutions to most of those issues at this point. So yeah, I mean, it's doable, and I'm happy to help in that regard.
Denver area, not Pueblo as well, with the school.
There are some schools in Region 1 who are talking about. As usual, the vast majority are campus chapters, because of course the one thing about students is they graduate and there isn't already always someone there to take over. I think there's only one pro chapter this time, is that right? And is that just a matter of they're inactive and not producing events now, or is that the issue there?
They're inactive. Joe can probably speak to that a little bit more. It's his chapter, but specifically what we see with pro chapters is their board shrinks and shrinks and shrinks until they're left with 2 people who volunteer and are holding the bag. And it's just not sustainable for them.
Big press club Milwaukee. Milwaukee has a press club, and if you're a broadcaster or a journalist in Milwaukee, you're part of the press club. Press club is not supportive of SPJ.
So that happens also with some SPJ chapters in Charlotte, they just have strong local competition with one another. And is there a way to maybe keep their SPJ members there who are still interested in being
They are,
SPJ
and they're still
members?
members.
Yeah,
They're members,
maybe
yeah.
hold another chapter.
They work with Madison a little bit and share and do some events between them.
I move the board approve the staff recommendation.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. Now we move on to governance update, and Patty, I'm going to ask for some assistance from you and also from us. Obviously, we're voting here in a couple days on the changes to reduce the number of members that would be serving on the board. I appreciate everyone checking and kind of feeling out how chapters and delegates feel. That I think was very helpful and definitely appreciated. Patty, what would you like to add? Just what can we help with now that we're here and it is here?
Well, a couple of things. We did have 2 virtual meetings in the month of August that were attended by about a dozen to 15. There was no great outcry of opposition during those, so people were not hopping on those calls to pick them apart and try to torpedo the whole effort.
Those were committee calls or general
They were
information calls?
One was open to anyone, and one was designed for the delegates. About 12 to 15 per call hopped on and off because it was virtual. The Long Island chapter is the only chapter that offered a formal response in terms of an amendment. They would like the regional coordinators / current regional directors to be specifically acknowledged, or having a specific role on the board, a designated role. And I believe where they left it, Joe, was that if such a person wasn't elected as an at-large under this new structure, that one of the 2 appointee positions would then go to an RD/RC. As you might remember, when I think we met in April, we decided to build into the bylaws proposal that campus community, either academics or students, would likewise have a role in the board if they weren't otherwise elected, right, or to an at-large position or one of the officer positions, right? So that's an item that's going to come up during floor debate. It's a meeting. Aside from that, I know a number of you exchanged information via email with your chapters, or you met with your chapters in your regions, and a good number of you wrote that your chapters are endorsing. So that you discussed it at the board level, local board level. And so I'm optimistic that it's going to go. I mean, if it doesn't, I really don't know what's next, but I'm not even thinking about that. I feel like it's going to go, and I feel like we're going to have a more streamlined board. I really like that Joe put some language to what our future might look like, right? With a STX that are, talking have the same game plan, moving forward together, having a strategic vision, setting some annual goals. Imagine that, So I think, you articulated it really well, that we've hit, we've had a lot of high points over in recent years, but we can do better, be more consistent in hitting home runs. So I'm sorry, that was like all over the place. I wasn't ready to give you a report, but I'm happy to answer questions if I can.
One question with the Long Island chapter. So in not saying that we would do this, but a solution for them would be to say that someone from the regional directors is appointed as a board member, or that they just report to someone?
Well, I believe they left it as the same as the campus academic proposal, that if a RD is not otherwise elected to a officer position or at-large position, then one of the 2 appointees should go to that party, right?
Yes, specifically, they said the regional coordinators would choose who should be appointed to
Got
the
it.
board.
Okay, so they would be appointing a board member, meaning that there would then be potentially, if there isn't an academic, someone from academia, student, professor that is elected, or a regional director, yes, then both spots would be taken.
A man
But
on the
RD
board
caucus would.
that, RD number 7, go to the board, or they would appoint.
Only the board has the authority to appoint. The regional coordinators would, I would, here, in practical terms, I would say, much like the regional director caucus chair is chosen, it would be, they would come to the board and say, we would like this person to be appointed. And I suppose if the board wanted to push back, it could say no. But the board is the one who ultimately would appoint.
That's an important wording consideration that I hope BCLI is thought of.
One of our points of discussion was that it seems quite unlikely to those of us on the task committee that somebody who doesn't have regional experience would be absent from the list of candidates. After all, we have 12 people who are leading the board. Many of them are very involved and knowledgeable, and I would anticipate would want to go on. So nonetheless, we might get to the floor and have that added. Although there was some question mark about whether it could actually be offered from the floor. Maybe we should call on, is this a time to ask Bob to clarify that?
You can, but I think in the conversations Erwin and I had, we think the way that they structured their amendments, it's just a simple addition to what we already have for the campus. So it would not require a separate election to figure out who the person is or anything like that. So because it's a board appointment, that it becomes more of a minor thing. That was Erwin's feeling on it anyway. But one point of clarification, just so everyone's clear, what the press club is proposing is not that the appointment happens if someone on the board doesn't have chapter experience. What they're saying is one of the 11 or 12 regional coordinators will be on the board. So not if there's just no representation, one of the regional coordinators will be on the board, either by appointment or if they choose to run and win in the election. So they want one of those 9 seats to be a regional coordinator, is the short of it.
Of course, they're no longer a regional coordinator if they're elected to the board.
They would have to serve two roles.
Yeah.
Much like regional directors do now.
Joe, as I read it, but you probably stated much more, it would have to be a currently serving regional, but it would not be sufficient to have previous regional level experience.
That's right.
So
It is a
it has to be one
current
of
thing.
those 12 people, like with the campus appointment, it could be any one of 1,000 or 1,500 people,
Correct.
or 1,000 students we have. But in this case, it would have to be one of those 12 people.
Correct. They asked us on the call if the task force would support it, and none of us felt comfortable saying, I don't think any of us did. I don't want to put words in Erwin's mouth, and Jason can speak for himself, he's here,
It's not a
but
confrontational kind of feeling though.
No.
They were very collaborative and wanted to kind of craft language that they thought we might like. Nonetheless, that's where it stands right now. So
I'm not sure if I understood what you said. The task force people did agree to with what PCLI was recommending? You did not.
we do not support setting aside one position for a regional coordinator specifically. We feel like the pipeline is there and the conversation is there.
and we also felt like we're going to be going down a slippery slope. Part of the whole plan here is to get away from a strictly representational model where we're seating people because of the constituency that they represent. So if we start doing that, okay, well, we're going to go to regional and we're going to have the campus, and then we're kind of back to square one, where we're swatting people for the community they came from rather than the expertise and vision they bring to the board.
And then Michelle and then Matt.
So I think you kind of answered my question, but if a regional director now wanted to run for one of the seats, then they can't be regional coordinator at the same time.
It would just be on the board.
They could do both.
They could be. I mean, I don't think that's not a point that's actually been clarified or brought forth as an issue.
Actually, point of clarification, how we're discussing this for a year and a half, but how I read it is that someone could conceivably do both. They could be a regional coordinator and an at-large director at the same time. They could run with that.
Yep.
Right. So
Could they be an officer and a regional I would say that's not advisable.
No.
Because that's what I'm getting
Well,
from the regional thing.
Isn't the current model that if someone is a regional director and they run for one of the officer seats and win, that they are no longer a regional director?
Currently, but that's because that creates a vacancy on the board.
This one created.
Right, no, I understand. So why would-
But that is not clarified in the PCLI language. I mean, this is several cans of worms
Yeah,
that just
it
been
is.
opened in the last 5 minutes.
Well, I guess I would say it's not difficult from the standpoint of a regional coordinator can run for an at-large seat if they want. And if they win, then they have two responsibilities and we move on. If no regional coordinator decides to run and the at-large positions are filled, then the board has to appoint one of the regional coordinators. There's nothing in the bylaws that prevents somebody from being a regional coordinator and a board member at the same time. So I don't see it as, I guess I don't see it as a conflict. Now, it may not be advisable from a workload standpoint, but legally in the world of SBJ bylaws, it's not prevented.
So San Diego had this discussion last night. You want the early version is that we decided to enforce the proposal as is, but with the caveat that there is some sort of reporting mechanism between the regional coordinators and the board. There were some people who really were all in on the PCLI idea, and I walked them back a little bit and obviously succeeded because of both. But I think that their concern is a good one, that they're worried about this connectivity between the two. And so I think a compromise maybe comes up tomorrow, or someone can talk to PCLI today, is to say that we could do that the same way that the communities deliver an annual report. There could be some sort of annual report. I think the concern that PCLI has and some of the people in San Diego had was that there will be no bridge between the national posse and the chapter level kind of forces.
I think that's legitimate. Is completely contrary to my vision of how this new board is going to work. It's going to be a smaller board, but as we outlined in one of the proposed policy documents, that there would be defined lines of communication for the at-large and potentially even the officer positions. That, for example, the RD community, they would have a direct line to, X at-large person, and the communities would have somebody, and the committees would have someone, and maybe an ad hoc. There's all kinds of possibilities, and it's going to be up to a newly constituted board to set up those lines of communication so that information does flow back and forth, and that the RV community always knows who to go to get their questions and issues addressed. And I think, working them into some level of reporting back to the board, I think would be advisable.
I think that the fear is that in 20 or 30 or 40 years, you're not here, that board kind of doesn't lose sight of that reset. So as long as there's something in writing, I think that will alleviate the concerns that are out there apparently.
Which that's in the organizational flow, right?
It
If I
is.
remember properly.
It is, but just keep in mind that the task force drafted policy possibilities, but it's really going to be the newly situated board that's going to have to review what are the best procedures by which to go forward as a smaller board. Right, Jeff?
Erwin said something on one of our calls that has stuck with me, and I think it's important to remember. Regardless of what happens, the delegates are the supreme governing body of this organization. And if this is adopted and as a bylaws change, and we think this is going to work, and in 2 years it's not working, the delegates have the authority to rip it all up and go back to what we have today. I hope they don't, and I don't think they will. I think this is going to work and I have faith in it. But ultimately, the delegates are still the supreme legislative body of the organization. If at any time the delegates feel like the chapters are not being communicated with well enough, they have the ability and the authority to direct the board to create policy to ensure that doesn't happen. They have the ability and the authority to tweak the board structure and how that comes together. So I think it's important to understand that what we're going to be voting on at the end of this weekend is not one of the 10 commandments coming down from the mountain. It can be adjusted and adapted as needed as we move forward into this. And frankly, I would expect that it would be. We're trying something brand new we've never done before. I don't believe we're gonna get it 100% like perfect right out of the gate. I think there's gonna be some nuances that come up. But I think it's important to remember that this organization has the ability to do that because of its delegate structure. So as you're talking with your chapters and others, Erwin said, I would encourage you to think about this is a first step. We think we're onto something. We think it's really gonna work, but there's nothing that says we can't tweak it down the road. So.
Yeah, Jane.
I think what you're talking about doesn't really be part of the CCLI. But I also think there's a belief among some members, not just in CCLI, that if you're building a competency or experience-based, an expertise-based board, that understanding the function of the chapters and the way they will work is a form of expertise. They're very concerned, and I think some of the things that you're saying probably alleviate that, but they're very concerned about that, that there's a feeling that these are the people who actually know what the organization is, what the organization does. I've had several conversations with and it's not just PCLI, but people in Region 1, and they're, in general, they're in favor of the change in the board, but that's a concern. There is a concern around, maybe there's different, but there's a concern that the chapter region national system is an entity that they want to run.
And none of that is going to change at this moment in time. The bylaws proposal does not call for any changes in the regional structure, the chapter structure. And again, I would just say that I think a good number of people will come forward as candidates who have deep chapter and potentially regional experience and know the importance of our structure in that regard. So,
Amanda?
I'd just like to remind us that we have two proposed two open seats on the board based on the direction of the board at that time. And for moving forward, it's thinking about the larger picture. And I hear the concerns that chapters not being represented, but ultimately we're all in the same organization. We ultimately know how important chapters are, how important regions are, how important we are as a national organization. So as we're having conversations, having those two open seats automatically be for campus representation or regional representation, why have the open seat? Why not just add this to the board if that's going to be a concern? So we know we've had that conversation, but the main reasons we had those two seats open was, okay, this year we're going to focus on fundraising. So let's get somebody who's been involved with fundraising for the past 5 years and idea of what we as journalists don't have any clue about. So that's.
I saw a couple other hands. Matt, Andy, did you have your hand up? Okay. Andy, go ahead then, Matt.
I have two parts, but I'll hold one off until we're done with this topic. But one, on this point, are we just kind of maybe engaged a little bit? Are we just sharing what Long Island's concerns was for the good of the order, and people can decide when it hits the convention floor how they want to handle it? Does the board want to have a response to this? Does the task force have a response to this? I mean, why did we pick out their point to share with everybody versus anything else?
Well, they did submit something formally.
right, they're the only group that has come forward, only chapter that's come forward with an actual proposal that they're going to offer on the floor. So that's why we're addressing it. As to whether this group should take a position on their, is it an amendment?
It's an amendment to the proposal.
Yeah, I don't know that that's necessary, but if somebody wants to propose that, that's their prerogative. So that's the only reason Andy was spending time on theirs. But I would say is, I think everybody on this board should be informed of this one particular proposal that's going to be talked about, person on it with others. Opinions, anybody who asks you about it.
But I think, Andy, you do bring up, a good point. Is there, I could even respond and write a letter, right? Just kind of with thoughts from the board, and maybe it would help kind of alleviate some of that, Jane, like you said, it might, which isn't a bad idea, which I totally would be willing to do. The task force, you said, did respond to them and say, that would not be something that they would be for.
We did verbally, we
Verbally,
asked
okay.
on that call, would we support it? And nobody spoke up that they would support, that they would vote for that amendment.
But that's not quite the same as actually responding publicly, because now we share their concerns and proposal with everybody, and no one sees what the reaction might be or why this is a bad idea.
In what we sent out, we sent out their amendment to the delegates, correct? And was there a statement,
And chapter leaders.
was there a statement then responding from the task force? Any language that said task force does not support this for following reason?
I'll have to remember exactly what that message said. But I think that memo said the task force stands by its original proposal,
I think it did as well.
but that Press Club of Long Island is proposing this amendment.
So if I wanted to write a letter kind of talking about and summarizing kind of what was discussed here, I could do that and get it to the delegates? Or
I
how would
think
that
your best
work?
bet is craft messaging and share it in the room.
Okay.
That's my opinion. But I think the question still stands, does the board as a group want to take a position on it?
Which we could.
I mean, I think it's kind of late in the game for that. I just said, let it go to the floor and see, and let the chips fall where they may.
Matt?
So 2 questions and then a comment. How many other chapters agree with PCLI? I know New Jersey does, right? Are those the only 2 that have?
Right, there's been no poll, there's been no straw poll that I know of trying to get a census or not, so I don't know that.
The only Region 1 chapters that, directly spoke to me about it was PCLI and New Jersey.
And so second question, how many chapters have come out against the original proposal? 0, right?
Fort Worth did.
Who did?
Fort Worth.
Fort Worth did. Why? Cool. What's the, why?
They didn't like the idea of the RD.
So
So
my
similar.
comment is because of this, I think we should get in front of it. And I would suggest it would alleviate San Diego's concerns and maybe Fort Worth and Jersey and Long Island's, just to, even if it's as simple as, I think that if you tell them that the group that is formed at some point in the future may decide to listen to your concerns, that's gonna go over very poorly. That's how they're gonna hear, that's not what you said, but that's how they're gonna hear that. So I think that we should just say, we'll treat this group as we do as I kind of said earlier, as we do a normal committee, and they will have an annual reporting process, just to be upfront on our part, to say, that's what we're gonna do, promise it, and lock it down.
I think that's fine, but I do think that's gonna be a policy decision that the new board is gonna have to,
And that's-
we can say in this room that we recommend that. That we,
Well, I think we should make a formal
in
proposal to say
deference
we'll
to
have
or
it.
in acknowledgement of the PCLI amendment, that, this board recommends that there be some kind of formal structure for the RD community, that we could call it RD community, as opposed to the regional, so go for it, man.
Why can't we just say it'll happen? This is my question. To appease,
Well,
now
except
three-
we're
now
suggesting
3.5
policy for
chapters.
something that hasn't been voted in yet, so.
But it's a pretty minor change, isn't it? I mean, or not?
Not minor.
Well, but so you'll have to remember when we drafted, when the committee worked to draft position descriptions and that, the organizational chart, that's not something that we as a board have voted on because it doesn't exist yet. So that's what we're proposing as possibilities, but once this new board is formed, they would be the ones to vote on that and formalize it because it's not in the bylaws to change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does,
Okay.
but I don't know if people on the island here, but like I said, it seems like a very small give
Right.
to alleviate 3.5
Well, I
chapters
think-
worth of concern.
Right, I think we could certainly take a vote on what we think of that particular amendment. We could also acknowledge from the floor that a draft policy that the task force recommends a new board adopt shows that there is a true line of communication between the RDs and, a to-be-named at-large director. That's what that chart shows. It shows different communities, different constituencies, and the pipeline to board communication. So we could say that that's certainly been thought about and and considered. And in fact, we have a draft of a policy, a chart by which that would be accomplished.
And I would be fine with putting something formally in response. Would it get to the delegates, and even if it's an email to Long Island,
Could it be read on the floor?
even read on, okay.
Just
That'd
So that would be
nice.
something that I could even read standing there, and we can maybe get out the emails for some people who aren't here that are chapter members that just kind of reiterates that for people. Because I do think the intention is there. It just maybe hasn't been communicated maybe as well as we think it has, obviously, if others have that concern. Bill?
Did you have something you wanted?
No,
to
I was
add?
just waving you on.
As you know, I'm like UPS, I love logistics. Has it been figured out how this portion of the meeting is going to be run? Are you going to run it, Lynn, or are you going to pass it over to Patty to run? Is Patty going to stand next to you? Patty's not going to do it. I think whatever we do, if you have a statement, rather than the minutes of the meeting saying the board discussed the PCLI proposal, that's the end of what it says in the meeting, or in the minutes. I think the minutes have to be very precise to capture what we all seem to be agreeing on, so that future boards have that to look at when they say, oh, here's what they meant.
So I will be running the meeting. I am going to be asking Patty, Erwin, and Jason to be up there to potentially answer questions, and Bob as well when it comes to specific bylaws. But yes, I will be running it, and I will have them up there sort of as support to kind of go into some more of the details that I may not know all of.
Technically, staff keeps the minutes.
That's
And
correct.
I would just recommend that staff be directed to keep pretty detailed minutes of this kind of stuff, because it's going to matter. No.
They are recorded.
Yes.
The board meetings are closing
Not
business
the
meeting.
opening
Yeah,
session.
we've streamed the closing
That's
business
what I
Should we
meetings
keep
as
them
well.
now? Because
That's-
the old lawyer said don't.
Although the new lawyers say don't, but we do anyway.
Andy, did you have?
Yeah, I'll just come back to this, and Matt, when you feel that something should be added, I think make a motion and do it. I'd rather that, as Matt said, you get out in front. If we've reached the point where we have made a recommendation about the proposal, let's make a recommendation about other things that come up about the proposal. So I'll make a motion that the board recommend against the PCLI proposal.
Second.
Discussion?
Doesn't Long Island have the opportunity to propose an amendment on the floor?
Sure.
So why wouldn't they just do that? I mean, why wouldn't
Well,
they
I
do
think
that?
that's
That's what they are doing.
Yeah.
So why would we
They
why
just
would we
gave us
need
an
to
early
make it,
heads up on it.
why would we need to have an opinion? We can have opinions on it, but why would we need to strike it down or approve it here? Let them take it to the floor
Well,
and
because
let it be
they,
discussed by the group.
they brought it to the task force in
Right.
advance, so
And
it's a
you
little
just-
bit out of order, right?
Right.
Because they haven't
You said
offered
you
yet.
answered them, you answered there, and said this is not how it's set up. That this is not currently how it's set up. However, you're welcome to bring this into discussion.
I think the thought is that it's with the board recommending either for or against, it does send a message, hopefully, that, they respect all of our opinions, where they're elected, lawmakers, they voted for us. So that, if we are saying as a group, we do not support this, and then if I read something, from the floor, kind of explaining why and send it out ahead of time too, then it shows we discussed it, we paid attention, but we still do not support it, and here's why.
I would recommend that any kind of letter, and I'm sure you'll know how to do this, be very welcoming, conciliatory, thanking them for their input, acknowledging that we totally value the efforts of the regions and the chapters that they represent, and that it would be our strongest hope that a new constituted board would take heed to that long mission, blah, blah, blah.
Joe?
I would add to that too. I think there's an assumption that if there's not a specific seat for them, they won't have one. I can see many boards deciding that the best thing to do is to ask one of the regional coordinators to sit on it. Like, I could see them wanting to appoint that position anyway. The question is being forced to use it at a time when maybe that's not the best use of the resources. So in any way that you guys can convey, we're not saying it will never happen. We're saying you could potentially be handcuffing. Quite often, it may very well make the most sense, and the board will do that anyway. I think that's important to remember too.
Because you called me out, friendly amendment, that we strike down this PCLI proposal, but recommend to the newly formed board that they consider a reporting mechanism to hear at least annually from, or just a reporting mechanism from the regional coordinator.
I work with that. I'll accept that.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passes. I will work on writing some up as well, and I'll circulate it
Your spare time.
in my spare time, yes. Okay. The only other thing I had just on the governance update, is, are there any, other chapters, people that we should be kind of mingling with, talking to kind of sell this if it's not a problem with anyone? Knows of any, don't necessarily say it here, but if you do, please let myself know. I know I'm more than willing to have personal conversations. Let us know.
Is there any kind of delegate mixer before the delegate training?
No more
We're a rush
mixers,
party.
Patty.
Such a fun.
Do they have a special color tag? So if you see-
They do.
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
Delegates do have blue
They
ribbons.
do have
Blue
blue
ribbons. So if you see somebody in the elevator with the blue ribbon, give them your elevator speech.
Very good idea.
There's
Is there a bar tab involved?
on Saturday, there's a 10:30 coffee and training. Chair, you gonna run that again?
We'll see. Might go home tomorrow.
You're going to Florida.
Yes, for chapter leaders, not necessarily only delegates. For all.
Do you intend to be at that, Patty?
I can't, I have another session.
Dan?
Is that on my thing?
Or
I can be there.
Jason,
So
or
I will be
somebody
there.
with the,
I will be there.
is Jason back there? I can't see. There he is. If you could plan to be there,
What time is that?
it's at 10:30 on Saturday. I don't know the room number, but anyhow, that's in the book, I'm sure. But I think that's probably a good place where you've got a critical mass of people who are really interested.
To answer your question, again, from Route One, because that's who we are, there has been some discussion. We'll talk about it.
Okay, I'm glad, yes, to talk about that. I had Andy and then Alex.
This is, maybe we answered this long ago and I still just don't understand it, but there's a series of supplemental suggestions about how this will be carried out, including the one that particularly bothers me the most, which is about how the nominating commission will work. How are we explaining this idea? Is this something that we are saying has been considered, but don't worry about it now? When the proposal passes, then we'll hash this out? Or should people be thinking about these things now as part of this vote?
Specifically on the question of endorsing.
Well, there's various issues that are just on the sidelines, but that's one of them.
You mean like the policies and those things that were drafted that are not necessarily things that will automatically
Right.
happen when this, or if this moves forward?
Right, like how
Because they
the
would be decided.
nominations committee will be created and what its purpose.
Well, I would say that the task force put some language on paper and we put it up there, but again, it really is gonna be the 9 people who are seated, 7 plus the 2, that will determine what is the best way to go forward with nominations, right? So our proposal was the past president was going to form this committee. We suggested who should populate this committee. I think, in the spring, we endorsed the general task force recommendations. As to whether we endorsed the policy possibilities, that is, Andy, exactly what you're getting to, how are we gonna position that if asked, during the vote?
Right, well, if,
Are we
and
gonna come forward and say,
I
I don't think we can say, as part of this change, the following things would happen.
Right.
In fact, as we drafted those, we used that very kind of tentative, this could happen, this we would recommend this, et cetera. So,
Right, the first part I agree with you, and the second part I just don't think is clear. And I'd
Right.
like to see if, we should make some reference to it specifically to say some ideas have been drafted, but they are in no way what is going to happen. Because there might be people who are concerned, as I was, about this, and say, well, I'm not voting. So.
right, right.
We
And
can
just to
definitely
explain
do that.
how this will be carried out.
Before take a vote and ask us to introduce, we can absolutely do that and just reiterate those points. And Alex?
Oh, well, I'm circling back, previous conversation, Kara, this Saturday morning meeting, this is the traditional chapter leaders meeting we have with the network.
The 10:30?
Yeah, the 10,
Yes, and then
Okay.
there's also a membership meeting that happens Saturday morning as well.
Well, there is that as well, but I think we said the 10:30 because we have chapter leaders there, we would also talk about or try and gauge their concerns. I've been to that meeting over so many years, and I do think it's very important for the chapter leaders to do the networking and brainstorming for chapter ideas, to drive membership programming. So, I mean, I realize this is topic A and we're all behind it, but maybe we could segment the meeting, so part of it is the governance, and then we have the traditional, so they don't miss out on that traditional networking and brainstorming ideas.
Okay.
Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Jason and Erwin. I know it's not here, but you guys did great work on this, and Joe, thank you as well. Okay, moving on to number 8.E, update on communications strategic plan. Jennifer, did you want to start and go over?
I'm sorry, did we vote on the?
Oh,
Yes.
Yes, we did.
Yes.
Yes. It passed. We did, yes. You seconded it, Phil.
I tuned out.
The report is there. Jennifer, are there any main points you want to hit on?
I think mainly for me, I feel like we're making good progress on the plan that was discussed in San Diego last January, and we've been able to accomplish a lot of things on that plan. Still working on some of them. Things happen day to day that pull us away from kind of longer term projects, but it's still all being worked on and on our radar. And that Rebecca and I have had conversations about it too, and I think the plan is just to kind of continue where we've left off and keep working toward our goals. So I won't go into detail if anybody has any questions.
Are there any questions? Did anyone? Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Joe, you're up. Girl Task Force recommendation.
Yeah, and Robert already talked about it, so I don't really feel like I need to unless there's questions. It's kind of laid out on page 29, which was also probably part of this was in Robert's report as well, but I wasn't sure if Robert would be able to make it, so we put it on here in case anyone had any questions. But
Any questions or concerns, discussion? Andy?
I've seen some discussion about beefing up Quill, but I've also heard us talk in the past that about do we want Quill at all? This survey, do we have a strong sense then that we definitely want Quill and we want it stronger and more strategic?
We did do a survey, and the response was very strong to keep it. Very strong.
As somebody who wanted to quit, I was very disappointed.
Pesky members.
it is the challenge with surveys in that those who responded were very passionate.
Yeah.
We only can use the information from those who respond. So
How many responses was it?
it was 5% of our membership. But not insignificant.
Andy, did you have anything else on that point? No? Okay, Alex?
Oh, just to say, so Paul and I are both on the publications for SDX, and the response we got was, first of all, overwhelmingly to keep it in print. But the only sort of naysayers were saying, well, yes, I like receiving it in print, but not at this quality. They wanted better editorial quality. but they weren't necessarily against print, but the few people who said they didn't want to see it in print, it was based on the quality of knowledge.
Any other comments on that?
So this memo has several recommendations. What's the next step?
Well, and I think that goes back to the question that you asked Robert, and that we don't do anything.
Unless this board wishes to say, don't do this, we hate this idea, the next step is management takes the suggestions and runs with them.
Practically speaking, this will be a conversation we have with the person who comes in to be Quill editor. We say, these are the goals for Quill. So it becomes part of their job description and their job.
What is your target for filling that position?
2 weeks before EIJ. So.
Which EIJ?
This one. So as soon as we can get back and get them packed and nail it down.
Have applicants?
Yes, yeah, we've been to the process and actually done a lot of interviews already. We just got in the way. We couldn't get it done.
Well, I feel like this body has not had a very rigorous conversation about Quill. That maybe SDX has, certainly your committee has, but that this group, and, correct me if I'm wrong, did I miss that? Did it happen before I was on the board?
I thought there would be more comments. I'm actually
Yeah.
surprised.
So
Maybe it's because Michael's not here.
yeah. I'm just, I'll start.
I'm sure he's here.
By my number of questions, you can tell that I have an interest in this topic. I think it's a product that needs much improvement, and I just see so many other similar publications and websites, primarily websites that are out there that are collating really good journalistic commentary and analysis and pumping it out every day. I subscribe to a dozen different listservs that shoot me really great analysis, and we are just nowhere near competitive in that regard. So I don't have a plan. I haven't delved into it, but if we're going to do it, I'd like to see us do it really at a high level and represent the society with quality content that just isn't there.
And I think that was what the SDX committee looking at this, that's what they would like to do as well, correct?
Well, I mean, it would be wonderful to turn out daily, high quality stuff like the one you're referring to. It is not in the position of the SDX board to do that, it would have to be our top priority. That's going to cost more money than we're spending on it now. The task force recommendations were to look at realistically what our resources are. What certainly not happy with the project as it's been right now, wanting to see better, and looking at within that desire, with the resources that we have now, what can we do to make it better? Even if we may not ever reach that point of the daily updates, but certainly, I mean, our next, I think, let's just take an example of what's going on with RV, what's coming with Irma. There's some tremendous journalism being done, tremendous work by journalists to do that. In our current print schedule, we get that out, next summer sometime? I don't know, maybe earlier than that. If we had more attention to what we're doing online, which I think gets there by reducing the print schedule, we could have stories up on that, maybe not tomorrow, but within a matter of when it's still relevant. And that's where I see people going. I don't see us devoting the kind of resources to it to make it the first place.
Robert, this is probably better perhaps for the SDX meeting, but I saw the discussion in the notes about using students. What we call University of Maryland published this American Journalism Review. And over time, it was diminished. We dedicated top editors and classes to the publication of that and took it online.
it was doomed from the start. It is very hard to sustain it. And I would really urge you to talk to Lucy, maybe learn from the experiences that we had, because I mean, this is about as practical as you're gonna get. This was a dedicated class, and a tremendous undertaking, and enormously challenging.
Yeah, just to follow up and answer some of your concerns, Patty. When we had a meeting of this committee, having an aggregated newsletter like you're talking about I think it's a great idea, but I think cooler heads prevailed and thought that that's going to take a lot of time and work. I still think the idea of having some level of aggregation on the website is doable. We spent probably the most amount of time on the whole student issue with several different, and Al, you can back me up on
No,
that.
we
is that we had a number of different proposals, everything from saying having a dedicated university somewhere that would go around and it would be considered a plum assignment that students could do it. The other would be to make it a real honor to be writing for Quill, to allow, that would give people clips, that would give them opportunity to, tout the fact, yeah, I wrote for the SDX National Magazine / website. So I think all those ideas are still in the mix. I think it really is going to depend on whoever Joe ends up hiring. And I would hope that he or she is going to be open to considering all of these ideas. Because I think probably everybody in this room would agree Quill needs improving. You're not wrong by any means on that point.
I think this is an opportunity to again, to move it just online too, because I think the whole publication is kind of outdated a little bit. And it leaves us it doesn't give us a lot of time to be emergent with stuff. But I think a combination of what Quill does and what Leeds does, I think would be, something that lands in your email, box every day or every week and has timely articles and timely discussions of Harvey, of Trump, of Ferguson. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to look at how to bring it into the places where people are looking for those kinds of things, and instead of waiting for their mailbox.
Can I say something real quick?
You can, yes.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, RTDNA has a smaller staff than we do. And they do have something like that where I'm often seeing, oh, that's really interesting, that's relevant to right now. So I'm not sure since we go on every conference with them, that's what they're doing, because I agree with Patty from the outside that when Quill comes, I definitely look over it, but it's not something I'm seeing often. It's not, when Quill comes, like, oh, I forgot about that, it comes around again. That's not the thought I think it should have.
So with RTDNA, it's just a daily email, and all they do is they really only update their blog once a day, primarily maybe, and they just move the first one up into this newsletter that goes out. A lot of them are actually written by the executive director, if I'm correct. Mike
You
brings
were
one of
principal
them.
writer for a while, weren't you?
And I did contribute. Probably will start contributing again once I have some free time. But so that is just all done online, and they circulate it in their newsletter, which is, I think, that was something when we redid how we have been sharing our newsletter leads that goes out weekly. That wasn't something that I showed them, because I agree with you, I think it's done really well, and I think ours is a lot better than it has been. So.
That was either staff written or pro bono. You weren't being paid or anything.
Not paid.
Pro bono volunteer work. And pretty good work.
Jane?
A question for Paul. When you were talking about working with universities or working with students or dedicating it, what came to my mind is there are at least 2 universities that I know of that have a news commons where you have some sort of an aggregation of news and information. And they're both Fair State University in New Jersey and University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Both do a lot of that kind of thing. I was wondering if we maybe consider a collaboration on that level, you know, with people who are already doing an aggregating project. I don't get the one from UNC Chapel Hill, but I'm concerned. But the other one has a news aggregation and also information for journalists, you know, in the area. It's not, it's very, very good. It's not very, it's going to be in a few years, probably, and we're still on the ground floor. I was wondering, it was just a suggestion, would you think about some sort of collaboration on that level, rather than kind of.
I think it's a great idea. I mean, we actually didn't explore that particular point. But in terms of, being a, the newsletters that everybody gets, there's Pointer, there's E&P, there's, I get about 5 myself, with you, which is why I like them. One, I think we ought to have one. That may be the answer, Jane.
Yeah.
And was it Montclair State?
Montclair State, which is a university in New Jersey.
Right, no, I'm familiar with them, just making sure I got the names right. And then
Yeah.
UNC Chapel Hill.
UNC Chapel Hill.
Okay.
Similar.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Alex and Sue?
Oh, just to respond and say, we did not get to that detail, and I wish we had that information. We knew how to committee, only work with information committee, but, what we had discussed was moving it around between us, actually just between chapters. But I like that idea, and even though the committee report has been written, we can bring it up to the public.
Sue, and then Amanda?
I would say, again, this is more, this is clearly an SDX thing, but I would, my 2 cents, anything that would minimize the amount of time that an instructor or professor would have to be dedicated, because there will be a dollar figure associated with that, because we'll take that instructor away from classes they can teach. That is huge. An aggregating opportunity obviously is going to minimize that. Anybody who is going to be actively, and those of you who are educators understand this, universities are loath to give you anything for free, because that takes away from their body, and it's going to be a huge problem. Make no mistake.
Amanda?
I just want to clarify that when we're talking about Quill, we're talking about the publication of SBA and not aggregating news feeds for our members. I feel like we're talking about like filling inboxes way more than we need to be filling inboxes. And in the report, it says that we recommend the earlier Quill committee is focused magazine's content on education and add some in-depth analysis on trends in journalism. We're not reporting on the news to give the journalists news they're reporting on. Whoever takes up Quill, it is really, really important that we focus, I think like we're doing with our board, focusing in on what is the purpose of this magazine. What is the content? What do our members need? Not necessarily how do we become the #1 magazine on the internet.
I think Amanda was kind of hitting on what I'm thinking about. I'm just still not sure. Maybe if I could hear some specifics, even pointing to an issue of the magazine. We like this, we don't like that. But it seems like we're kind of scattershot, and we're talking about education, which I can see some of the stories in this issue fitting that. We're talking about trends in journalism, which also is that. But we're talking about if only we could be quicker in reporting on things that are happening, then we're kind of losing it. I also saw some reference to directing some of the things that come out of headquarters, which might be statements. This is not really journalism news, but this is what SBJ thinks. And then we also have things what the chapters are doing. So we've got kind of a big stew that we currently do, and I still don't understand what parts of the stew we want to get rid of, and what parts we'll focus on. Robert, maybe you can respond.
If you get into that kind of detail, like I've been interested in learning of the teleconferences, so I'm not trying to follow. Did you get into that kind of detail as content?
No, we didn't make that up.
Okay, yeah.
There's more structure, right?
Yeah.
The one thing that was clear was that they felt like the Insider SPJ baseball needed to be taken out of the print and shared online if we're going to share it. That was the one concrete I think I remember in terms of any content recommendations.
So the profile of the month goes away, the president's letter goes away.
Maybe
What the
not that one.
chapters are doing goes
Chapters
away.
go away, yep.
And then
We did not, I'm sorry to stop, but we did not get that discrete, like, president's letter, we didn't discuss as an issue. We did say that chapter news could move online or be digital, because there's a lot of chapter news up front, and I don't think it's like per se. But the point is, we were just giving, guidelines for 3,000 feet, and you kind of need to wait till there's an editor to work on specifics on what we online.
But do we still want things, this is inside, or who's running for office in that 12,000, is that still a cool thing, or just move that to the board election page?
We didn't get to this level of,
No.
of discussion, Andy.
Yeah, there was no discussion about what specific kinds of content. All of the, from what I remember, and I don't know what's been said already, but the discussion that we did have was structured around very general ideas as far as what we wanted content to be like. I can forward you the email as soon as I find it, but from the gist of what I remember, we agreed that content, as far as content is concerned, we would create quote unquote meteor articles, and that was probably the extent of our discussion as far as what kinds of content we would do.
And that really was the charge to the committee was to do the 30,000, but not to get down.
So the goal was not to micromanage before we had someone in the position to fill that role, which I totally understand your concerns because I was on the same page when we were actually having this conversation. So I definitely understand, but we didn't get that far.
Just to follow up, Kings, if I could. One other thing, Andy, is the idea that it needs to be more immediate. Meatier and more immediate. That would be, not like you were saying that we would cover Harvey next summer. That it needs to be what is happening now. And seeking how to deliver that will be one of the charges to the new Quill editor when he or she comes on board, because I think we were in agreement. I would imagine people in this room are in agreement that we are missing a lick. That if we don't use the website functionality that we can create by having a Quill site that is provides that, and the e-newsletters or whatever, that's a function of pushing out content that's on the e-site. That's the reason why we might do that, Amanda. Is having some vehicle to provide this information. And then we get into the question of that newsletter versus leads, and that's when we kind of dropped it. Because that is getting into the weeds more.
Amanda, you had something, then Patty had something.
Just real quick, when I hear you say we want to write an article covering Harvey, what does that mean? Are we like aggregating the news and then covered throughout, or? And I don't want us to get too down maybe some editorial content, an editorial board, but I just want to be really clear at what we as the board.
I was just pulling that out of thin air as an example.
Yeah, no, I know it's an example, but it's, I think,
I mean, if you want to take it.
No, I don't think he was saying that we're talking about covering the hurricane, about like what we're going to do.
yes, and I just want to be really clear that
That's
that's what we're all.
That's the idea behind it.
So we're not
The general idea
aggregating
behind the content.
No,
Right.
no.
So kind of back to my original question, you have a memo that recommends some possible ways for a new editor to move forward. What, in reality, how's this gonna work? Joe's gonna hire a new person. Is this committee then going to work with this new person, or is that the executive director giving your new employee the kind of loose recommendations from a committee, right? If this seems to be the moment at which we should be specific about what we want out of this publication, and that your hiring decisions should be guided by what this group, this board and SDX would like to see done or not done with that publication / online site. So,
Even before I
yeah.
get to you, this is being discussed at the SDX meeting. Okay. Yes, so that's tomorrow. Yes, Friday.
Friday.
Okay, thank you. Joe, did you want to respond to that at all?
Yeah, I guess I don't see this working any different than anything else. In that I will get feedback from leadership, but in this instance, leadership about the way things are going well, not going well, things we want to see more of, where do we want our attention, where do we want our energies and resources focused. And so when we have somebody in place We will start with this because this is what we have that's been recommended by the group of leadership that studied it. And over time, as we feel like we need to ramp up here, decrease here, scale back here, move more online, we adjust on the fly. I think it's a position, it's a staff position that's going to be filled to carry out one of SPJ's programs and services, and it will be continually evaluated every time we do it. And whenever we need to make changes, we do. And who recommends those changes? It's going to come from everywhere, but I guess I don't see this as something that everybody has to agree on today before we can hire somebody and start changing the way Quill is. I don't know if that answers your question.
For the SPX publication committee to serve as a sounding board, not as a direct supervisor, that's always going to be the executive director. But to be there as a sounding board, for ideas, to be there if the editor wants to pass some ideas off of that group.
Ethan, Ed, and then Rachel.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of sounds like that group acts as sort of de facto editorial board, which doesn't really exist for this publication. It's kind of strange for our organization. Maybe that's something that exists once we get to these recommendations. An actual editorial board that's a combination of people on SPX. Maybe somebody from this committee and somebody from this committee, because there are a lot of stakeholders, obviously. I think that the editor should have control of but it is important that for reviews that phone is important, so maybe that's.
Thank you, Ed, and then Rachel.
At the risk of offending someone or some people, and I apologize if I do, but I look forward to getting my copy of Quill that arrives in the mail, but it's predictable. I end up skipping over a lot of articles because I feel like I've read the same issues. I would think Quill, in addition to the things that have already been discussed, is a great forum for showcasing outstanding journalism, writing and reporting. And the one story I remember, and this was I don't know how many years ago, it was about the dangers facing female journalists in Mexico. Some of you may recall that. But I remember I was so taken with that when I would visit campuses afterward, I would point that out, as an example of one of the benefits of SPJ. If we could have that in every issue, one showcase piece, or every posting, however often that would be, that's the kind of, we all talk about that in I used to in our jobs, is that you want a story where the people around the kitchen table say, oh my God, did you read that? That was one hell of a story. We need that kind of, at least one of those in each issue.
That is something IRE does. If you pick up IRE's magazine that comes, they highlight, that's basically all they really do is highlight stories, and they interview and give tips from the reporters on how they did the story, and it's kind of tip driven and educational as well. Rachel.
One of the concerns that I think we still need to address is where does the authority for Quill reside? And I think we've talked about it just in this meeting in passing that SDX has some authority, and that some of our language indicates that the board of directors have authority over it. So I think that is one thing that we should address and need to address before the next edit.
So it is under SDX, because that's where, go ahead.
I think what I would like to see eventually happen is just that section of the bylaw that was SPJ be switched over to the SDX bylaw, and then it's clean. It doesn't quite rise to the priority of the bylaw that took a proposal this meeting, so it's something we need to do at some point, but and I think that was clear up. But clearly, the SPJ board will always, it is an SPJ magazine. We may be paying the bills and we may be doing the hands-on stuff, but I think interest in this board has always been new. And I think everyone, Paul and Fred and I are listening very closely.
So it sounds like you guys have been listening. This will be discussed on Friday. Just, kind of one concrete thing was maybe, is there an editorial board? That was something new that I know I haven't heard before. Maybe that's been brought up, but that could be something that is discussed and becomes a possibility, which could then maybe address, is it that editorial board that oversees and it has members of groups? But.
Well, I think that the lesson to learn from the jogger on the bleachers photo is that we need to understand who the complaints need to be registered to. And I don't know that this board had anything to do with it. But should we have something to do with it? And should a member expect that when they have a problem with that magazine, that this board should be able to do something.
No, I think that's a valid point. I think, at the end of the day, it has SPJ's name on it, so it is something that, president, board will have to answer to. That's just going to happen. You're right, at this time, like, I have nothing to do with it. We don't really have anything to do with it, so, it makes it hard when you do have to answer to kind of, some decisions that are made, which as we saw, so, maybe that can be kind of taken back and considered as something that is maybe reworked. Is everyone's good on that?
Just one point, that issue did come up with the cover after not addressed in the report, we haven't addressed it.
Okay, we'll move on to the fundraising strategy session update. I know Robert, his note, or talked about it in his note, addressed it. Joe also mentioned it. I'll just, hopefully you read the memo. Very happy with the meeting. I think, again, it moves us along as we continue to think that we want to be more strategic. I think that's one more step. Fundraising is something that has been more a part of SDX, and I don't know that us as SPJ, while we talk about, oh, we want money things, we haven't necessarily fundraised, or kind of, had someone fight. The one thing I did want to highlight that I just think is really important, and I'm glad that we did, is we outlined pretty specifically when it comes to fundraising, what's expected, and then also staff responsibilities. So to me, it is really important because that was something that I don't know. I know, having been a member of other nonprofits, there are responsibilities that are specifically tied to fundraising or spelled out. Maybe it's raising a certain amount of money, bringing in, a certain number of donors, that kind of thing. And we don't have anything like that here, and I'm not suggesting them do, but I think I'm glad that we did talk about this and laid these out. So I do encourage you to look at them, and I'll go over some of them. But basically, the thought is just that, as board members, we should always be thinking of also bringing money or people. So whether that's in-kind donations of time, connecting SPJ to other leaders who can help benefit this organization. And that's something that I hope we all have thought about as board members, but that moving forward, board members are thinking about, but also know that that's the expectation. That, not only will you kind of donate and help bring people in to donate, but that you're willing and okay with having a conversation. And you're not maybe the one leading it, might be led by a staff member, but you're okay being called on to sit in a room and talk about SPJ and what we do and why it's so great, and you feel comfortable doing those things. So I was glad we outlined those things, and I'm hoping it's something that, really take a look at and see. And as we move forward, the board members do look at and think, okay, this is kind of the expectation, and we want people to be able to. Any comments on the fundraising? Andy, go.
I'll bring something up. I think this was maybe in the SDX packet, I don't remember, but I wanted to reiterate the phrase that went out for Day of Giving. It's just outstanding in all aspects. It was incredible planning, the execution, results, and everybody got a piece of it. Deserves high praise. Also, maybe this is channeling Chris a little bit, but there was a mention about giving by the individual boards, the SDX board and the SPJ board. And Chris will periodically say, I encourage you all to, everyone on the board, to give, even if it's just $50, and sends a message that everyone on the board has given something. And I saw the percentages were 89% SDX board, 4% SPJ board. So it's good idea to just give something so we can have that symbol of everybody got it. So,
thank you. No, that's a great point. Any other comments? No? Okay, let's move. Oh, Glenn.
What would it take to actually compel contributions from board members? Just a policy?
I know a couple boards that I have sat on. It is a requirement. Yeah. You don't want that goal. You can't be a board member. I don't know how they do that. I'm assuming it was a policy and you signed it and agreed to it. Joe, are there any other ways that you know of that you?
There are all sorts of ways you could. The question is, should you? I think that's the question. How far do you want to go to make that some sort of requirement? I don't know, because then you get to this question of, well, is my time not worth anything and I don't have the money to give, or, I think I would not change anything about the way we do it. Encourage, reiterate its importance, send reminders if necessary. But ultimately, I don't think you can really or should hold anyone's feet to the fire on that topic. I think it may create a lot of consternation. It's just not worth it. That's my opinion. But we can do whatever we want.
Bill, did I see your hand?
No, I'm ready for the next one.
Okay. Okay, well, moving on, thank you. Joe, you are up, the weekend donation.
Sure. So every executive director's dream is to come before a board of directors and say, we received $52,000 in the donation. What do we want to do with it? But I also realize what a loaded landmine field that is, because everybody has an idea of what we should do with it. So I am not a fan, to be honest with you, of trying to come up with projects on the spot. Let's use this money for one specific thing, and then it fizzles and dies. In this memo, you will see my recommendation is that we make the simple move. We take this donation, we put it in the First Amendment Forever Fund. It will spin off money every single year because that's an endowed fund. Because it would be board designated, if the board ever decided it wanted to remove that $52,000, it could and use it to something else, whether it wanted to put it back into the LDF fund or it did have a special project. What I did not want to have happen today is that the board sit around and decide what projects we might want to begin. Now, it's certainly the board's prerogative, but my recommendation is to put it into the endowment, build it. These don't come along very often, and I think it's hard to make big headway on our endowments, especially because we're a C6. And so when we get big money coming in, it's an opportunity to do things that we're normally not going to have. So that's a long way of saying my memo recommends we put it in the First Amendment Forever Fund.
I agree with that 110%. I think that is the absolute best place for this money. And we created this fund to be built upon, and this will go a long way in the goals and really be able to build this fund so that at some point we can do some true good with it.
I support the idea of putting it in the First Amendment Fund. But among the examples you gave was funding things like Ethics Weeks and Sunshine Week, which I regard as education. We have such a unique opportunity by being 501c6 that we can do lobbying. And I think the First Amendment Fund was set up specifically for 501c6. So I would pull out from your recommendation the Ethics Weeks, Sunshine Week, and ask our dear friends from STX to fund as an educational effort.
Yeah, and I think there's still, we haven't even really had discussions yet about how do we spend this money that's in this fund. The focus has been building. So when it comes time to set those parameters and how we want to use that money, some of you on the finance committee may remember I sent around an email earlier and said, what do we want to do with earnings from the Forever Fund? And the consensus was, let's keep sinking them back into the fund. So we're not spending money out of that fund. It just continues to reinvest. So Bill, your point's well taken. When it's decided how that money's going to be used, the board can decide that.
I move that we put this donation in the First Amendment Forever Fund.
Second. All those in favor?
Okay.
Any more discussion?
Do we have authorization from the estate of Hillary Wiggin to publicize this? And do we have information about Hillary Wiggin that we might want to share with our Quill readers next summer?
I'd have to check the parameters of I'd have to check. That's right.
Would we not, in the vein of let's promote contributions to SPJ and SDX, this would be an example.
Yeah,
and I'm sure Jennifer would do a great job.
We have talked about internally using this as a marketing tool, but of course we needed to know if we could put it in there first. It's a he.
Oh,
Yep, Hillary. Yep, it's a he. And we have very little information on him, to be honest with you. So.
But he has been a member until his death.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Mr. Wigan. Next, we'll go through spending policy, and then we'll take a short break after that. Maybe public comment if we can. Okay, so you remember we talked about this. This started after the hiring of a consultant. When was that? January, maybe, possibly?
Yeah,
Okay.
let's choose that one.
Okay, so the executive committee, wait, remind me, no, finance committee talked about this and did not come to a consensus to approve anything, so went back to the drawing board. Matt and Andy and Alex, others as well, but primarily those three kind of worked together for another proposal. And I want to make sure if you have it in front of you, please, look at it, because the finance committee did unanimously approve moving this item to the board here to approve. The draft language, or the language that was approved is the following: executive committee approval is required to pay for any services costing $3,000 or more unless the full board previously authorized the expense. 4 of the committee members approved this language. 3 were concerned that the 3,000 limit might be too low. Alex talked about the draft language with Joe. He did not view the 3,000 spending limit as problematic as long as the board interpreted this as expenditures that might exceed the budget. Real life example of potential repair work was given at the headquarters parking lot that would exceed $3,000, but could be included in the building maintenance line item of the budget. So again, I'll read it and then I will open it up for discussion. I assume maybe there are comments. Again, the line that the finance committee did approve or move forward to you to potentially vote on. Executive committee approval is required to pay for any services costing $3,000 or more unless the full board previously authorized the expense. Comment.
Point of information, will the new board have an executive committee? Well, the theory was it would not have an executive committee. Because it would be a small board.
Right.
So this is a meaningless resolution.
And to answer that, we did actually discuss this, why is the executive committee on the finance committee, which obviously will continue. We felt like this policy we're voting to put in place now, first of all, we don't know what the delegates will do, clearly. But even should the delegates pass it, we have a 2-year period, a transitional period. So this policy will be fine as written over the next 2 years. We will still have an executive. And should it pass, essentially the new 9-member board would be like the executive. And the reason the executive goes away is that the board is small enough now. We don't need one, so we could just apply this as a policy. It's not a bylaw. It would be easy for them to take out executive committee and just put it as a 9-member board, make it a full 9-member board.
Andy?
I think those point is good, but at the same time, we decided that, or at least I did, and others agreed with me, that we didn't want to just sit and wait for a couple of years and see what happens. This is something that arose, we wanted to react to it, and then when the time comes that the structure of SBJ changes, we revisit this. If it would make you feel better, I'm happy to turn this into the board vote. But I don't think that was there was enough consensus to go with that. So this was a compromise proposal.
And in truth, there are a number of policies that involve the executive committee. It's going to be a wholesale rewrite of a lot of what is currently already existing.
Well, my objection, although I object to the $3,000, I accept Joe's report that it would not be problematic. My problem is definition of all these words, and I think words matter. For example, we have been sent emails suggesting that we forgive the registration fee for this convention for people affected by Irma or Harvey. That will come to more than $3,000. Irma and Harvey were not contemplated in the budget. Therefore, this would need executive committee approval for that. I think you are opening a can of worms that you are silly to open.
Rebecca?
Well, first of all, it says consulting costs.
No, that's the old version.
Look at the second.
I'm sorry, my memo, I put the original and then the
Yes,
revised.
it's
You're reading
the
the,
second one.
the second one is
Yes.
the one we're.
You know, services costing $1,000, and you know, obviously, forgiving the emails that said we should forgive the registration fees, that's not services. So, you know, and also, I'm looking at this as a business person who says, you know, 3,000 is not very much money when you're dealing with services and consultants. So, I think it's a reasonable compromise amount, and yes, this is something.
I agree.
But, go ahead, Patty.
This would only apply when an expense is proposed kind of mid-year, off budget, right? And there's no language in here that indicates that these are more like extraordinary, one-time, unusual, unanticipated. I mean, that's basically what we were dealing with the consultant's question. For the most part, the staff is drafting budgets that anticipate our usual spending with some contingency fund, sorry, that word, built into it. So, yeah, again, I'm kind of leaning toward can of worms. I know, we've talked about this a lot.
Andy?
I'll just take a stab at that. We started out by saying we see a specific problem and how are we going to word it to address that problem. Trying to address the problem became a problem. Words do matter, and trying to pin down the specific words to address that problem is difficult. So instead, we intentionally left it vague. It's probably a better idea to look at something that's a broad policy. That's so a specific situation into a broad policy, but it addresses a fairly narrow set of circumstances. Joe brought up some ideas. Well, what if we had to pay for something that wasn't anticipated on the original amount? I don't think a lot of these things get caught in these studies. This probably isn't going to happen very much, but we wanted to address a concept. Some board members were not happy. So, no, you're right. There's a lot of interpretation here, but I don't think catches a whole lot beyond what we wanted.
Paul and Matt?
The most important word I heard you say earlier, Andy, was react. This is a reactive policy because you have a board that didn't like the use of consultants. Either the consultant that I used last year and came to this board and got your approval for, or the consultant that Lynn used in January, that she came to you and got your approval for.
No.
I did not.
The one for January you did.
No, I didn't. That's why.
I thought it was, no, there's twice you did it.
We voted twice.
Oh, you're
for it.
right. No, that's
Now,
right, yes.
the woman that we had in San Diego, Lynn came to
Yes,
you
that's true, yes.
and got your approval for.
It's the ethics week.
It's the Ethics Week individual
Thank you.
that Lynn, yes. So I think you're reacting to that. To some extent, I think it's a little punitive, was a word that was used within the Finance Committee. I think it creates all kinds of problems. Brother McCluskey and I were among the three who voted against it in Finance Committee. My rationale for voting against it, as I will again today, is it's reactive, and I think $3,000 is way too low a figure.
I was gonna ask, what kind of consulting can you require $1,000?
The woman for ethics, it was what, about $5,000?
Correct.
Yeah, the consultant that I had was about 8,000. The one this past January was in the same neighborhood, wasn't she?
Technically, their consulting fees were both less than 3,000. But when you factor in travel and expenses, it goes above.
For the overall.
8,000 was for the overall meeting for everyone to come.
But we were gonna have that anyway.
Yes.
Okay, so $3,000 and $3,000. So I think the fact that it's moved over to services, I think underlying all that is a concern by a few members of this board over the use of consultants, and should be recognized as that.
Matt.
As the person who helped drive this, I will say two things in direct response. One is that it is reactive, and anyone who's covered a government agency in this room, probably most of us knows that most legislation is reactive. Two is that it's not punitive at all. That was never my intent. We're fiscal stewards of money. I think that we should be, to Andy's valid point, addressing a very narrow issue. The wordsmithing became difficult, sure. But, people of sound mind and good kind of intention got together in a room. I'm not on the finance committee, so I wasn't part of those conversations. But I think this is a good faith effort to address a problem that will not be that much of an encumbrance for a president or the kind of smaller group of us who wants to do something of import. I guess my last point is the executive committee can very quickly get approval. This isn't like this is something that's going to drag on for days or weeks or months. This can be done in a Zoom conversation, or I don't know what our bylaws say, but this can be done through digital means very quickly. I don't know how many people on the executive committee, 5? 7. So most of those people will be readily available, and if the president thinks it's important, the president will say, let's have this conversation quickly. This is an important thing. But now all those things said, I'm going to vote for it. I do think it's important. I think we're making a strong financial statement. And I just want to push back politely and say that this isn't punitive at all. And I don't think it's a few. We'll see what the vote says, but I also think it's a mischaracterization to say that it's a few people.
Thank you. Amanda?
I think when we consider this, our goal or our job as a board is to have the ability to call a plan, making sure that we are financially comfortable for the board. We do our job.
Yeah, and I might as well, since one mentioned Bill, were the two that were concerned about the figure, said that I was actually the third person who was concerned that the figure was too low. When this first issue first came to the finance committee, I actually was first initially very supportive of a policy like this, and I still am. I was just concerned by the $3,000 figure and also the more generic term of services rather than consulting services. Capture almost everything we do, and I don't think we want to do that. And this issue happened to come up on, I think it came back to the finance committee on the 4th of July weekend while Joe was away for a while. So that's why I wanted to discuss it with him, and he did not feel that it was a problem as long as it was understood as exceeding or potentially exceeding the budget, that line item in the budget by at least $3,000. I personally still would probably be a little more comfortable with, say, 5,000. I mean, that's just my personal. I think 3 is a bit low and might capture expenses that are not what we're trying to target. What we're trying to target is really very discretionary spending, such as hiring a consultant that's not envisioned when this goes past the budget. And I'd like a policy that really does target unexpected discretionary spending. So I'm just worried about it being a little too broad, but I do actually support the policy and the language of slightly more comfortably 5,000. So I don't know, I just want to throw that out to see if other people around this board are concerned more with the figure 3,000 or perhaps with the language such as services.
What is services? Has anything except the concern over consulting been an issue? Okay. Anything come up that they've spent money on that people have been upset about?
Using the dollars for consultancies, consultants, whether we're getting our money's worth in that decision to spend that. And I have some, tell me if I'm wrong on this, as I read down into the committee report on ethics, there's a line in there that says that the publicity plans fell through. And is this, did we hire this person for ethics week for 5,000 to specifically create publicity that fell through? So to me, the greater issue is if we spend money for a consultant, are we getting our money's worth? Was it well spent? That is something that we as a should.
Michelle?
So I think in the effort to,
I know it's,
sorry, go ahead.
Michelle.
I know it says that you changed the word consulting because it was hard to define that, but then services seem harder to define. So why can't you just say consulting?
I would feel better if it said 5,000. Sorry. This 3,000, in today's economy, $3,000 for services or consulting or whatever is so incredibly low that 5,000, even 6,000 means a lot more expense. I mean, if you all hired me as a consultant for a day, that's $10,000. That's my side hustle. It's a pretty lucrative side hustle. So, you know, it's too low an amount. We need to have something to help protect ourselves, but if we do 3,000, the executive board really isn't bothered as well. Whether it's services.
Matt, and then Andy, did you have something?
Yes, and we may have to talk about the same thing. When we first talked about this, I had suggested 5, Andy wanted 1.
$1? $1.
Point of clarification, that was 1,000.
We all believe one.
So if the board's faith, you know, if the board members want to go 5, I'm totally comfortable with 5. The reason why I chose 5 was because for Paul's point with 3 consultants, I think, and again, refresh my memory if I'm wrong here, always dangerous to go off memory. I think those 3 consultants were 10,000, 8,000, and 5,000, or thereabouts. So one of them was, the lowest was 5,000, which is why I thought it might be a good benchmark for.
Andy, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I'll come back to what Paul was saying. And I respect your position, and I know that you see this as kind of a continuation of the battle of the consultants. I felt that as a board member, I was opposed to all 3 of them, and I wouldn't be opposed to consultants in general, unless you convince me. But I felt like I had a chance to air that opposition through the first 2 votes. I did not walk away satisfied, but I felt like we hashed it out, and I was ready to move on. But I did not feel like I had that in the 3rd round. And that prompted a broader thought of, well, how can we, not like what's our strategy to be anti-consultant, but how can we avoid situations like this? And maybe move some of the balance back to the board in a situation that's up on anything. I wanted consultant, but we struggled with what is a consultant. So we can hash that out. But the other thing is that I cite this occasionally, maybe they'll call it peculiar doctrine, but about carrying ourselves out in the way that we see the governments that we cover. And the governments that I cover have spending policies. And I've covered a lot of situations where something hits that benchmark and then they all haggle it out. I feel like that is an appropriate policy for us to have.
Andy, did you have anything?
I was just going to move, we raise the amount to $5,000.
Okay, do we want to vote on that same sentence, but with the $5,000?
I had 2 questions I threw out, should 3 be 5? And there was a lot of discussion in the finance committee also about the word services versus consulting services. At first, some people had questions about, well, consultants could cover auditors, lawyers, or tech support, but services is obviously much more broad than consulting services. Do we want to have any discussion about that, decide which this board, and then I'm definitely willing to move to a vote on the sentence. But I think we need to address those 2 questions before we vote on this sentence.
So there's been a recommendation to raise it from 3 to 5. And then any thoughts on consultant versus services?
I'm a little confused. It's like, so I think, are we moving to simply amend the proposal?
Is there a motion on the table?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're talking about potential friendly amendment.
So there was not a motion for the original policy from the finance committee. That has not been moved yet.
No,
It
no.
is not.
Finance
Okay.
committee based
That's what I thought.
So there's no friendly.
Well, unless one's motion is to approve with that.
No, so before we approve this, like before this is finalized, I propose that we change the $3 grand to $5 grand, and then go forward with whether or not we should actually even do this.
Are you moving to just make it 5,000?
Yes, I'm moving
Okay,
to.
so we don't have the original proposal from the finance committee, but Keene has just put the motion on the table. And it's been seconded, so I guess that's what we're.
Yes.
And
And
the
now we're
minutes should then reflect that this is no longer the finance committee's recommendation.
But we didn't make an official. Our recommendation was to move it to the board. The finance committee did not vote up or down on this.
Okay, so the motion on the table is same sentence, but instead of 3,000, it's 5,000. Andy?
Since we talked about how this will change, and that there's now going to be a floodgate of changes that we'll have to address, maybe Joe could just tell us how many times do you think a vote will come up under this policy?
Well, I'm pretty damn good at budgeting, Andy. So,
But you're not going to be here.
and this is my point. This is my point. You're working within a context of what it is today, and I have really intimate knowledge of how we are as an organization, what we need to budget for, and where things need to be headed. You know, let's just say building maintenance, right, is an issue. I will put in the budget that we need to repave the parking lot the year we need to repave the parking lot. So it's not unexpected. If you do have an executive director or anyone else who's overseeing the budget and they're not quite as intimately familiar as I've become over the past 8 years, it will come up more often. So it's a question that's asked in a vacuum. For me, when I was asked, this would not come up all that often. But that's me.
It's not up to you.
It's
It's
not.
up to any member of this board who wants to raise it.
Right. So the question, how I view this is, how often would I have to come to the executive committee and say, we need $3,000 because this was not considered when I budgeted? And the answer is not very often. And the only times I can really think of that I did not come to the board anyway would have been the ethics week thing. And Lynn and I actually talked about that too. But when we have things like, hey, we need to move upstairs because we have somebody who's interested in leasing the first floor, it's going to cost us $30,000. How do we feel about that board? And the board considered that, or at least the executive committees did. I think the foundation was executive committee. So when there are big expenses, I naturally bring them to the board anyway. What do I define as a big expense? That depends on what it is. Yeah, 3,000 I would say is not. 5,000 maybe. 10,000 I definitely would. But it's arbitrary and it's in a vacuum because whoever the next executive director is may work differently. I guess my whole take on it, not that anyone's asking my opinion, is it's happened. This has happened because the consultants have happened as out of a desire to try to operate more strategically. If as a board, we start thinking in terms of being strategic and our budgets reflect what our annual goals are, there won't be surprises. And if there's surprises, they will be emergencies. We've come to the strategic meetings after the budget's been passed 18 months prior. If we as an organization get to the point where our budgets are aligned with our annual goals every single year, there should not be surprises. Does that make sense to everyone? But we're not there yet.
Right, and in the short term, you're gone, and
Right.
the next person may need some stopgaps, something to say if you're going to spend 3,000 or 5,000 that wasn't already agreed to. Watch you take it to the executive committee. So.
And then I'll add another layer to the whole thing too. Is I think this is a policy that's the spirit of the board's role. The reality, the practical matter of it is our policy in office and what our auditors say is any check over $10,000 needs 2 signatures. Tara and I can cut a check, sign it, and be off to Tahiti before you guys ever knew. So, and I don't think we would ask your permission.
That sounds pretty specific.
I don't. Well, you know.
December 2.
My point being, this policy should not be viewed as some sort of protective measure. It's not. It's a policy designed to give the board comfort. So whatever that number is, that has to be decided by you all.
I don't think we need to be micromanaging something like 2,000. I mean, more than $3,000, or like some $3,500. I don't think we need to like call, no matter how fast it is. I don't think we call an executive meeting to approve that. Like, what if, for whatever reason, there's like 2 or 3 different instances where the new executive director or the next president wants to do a bunch of small projects that will require $3,400. I don't see. It's kind of self-defeating. We got other problems that we should get through with, and I don't think if we're going to do this, it should be more. Like, I feel like that's kind of like a bottom line kind of a statement. Like, I don't think we should be debating about whether or not we should have a vote over such a small amount of money. Yeah, especially considering that this isn't something that's like happened a lot, that we are all worried that SPJ is going to go broke because the president's spending money without our approval. I think that we should determine whether we change this, my motion that I just launched a couple minutes ago, whether we change this from 3 to 5. If we're going to change 3 to 5, great. We're not, whatever. But I think we should determine what we're going to do about this and then move forward, because we're wasting time, honestly.
So the motion on the table is that the sentence with the 5,000, let me just read it. Executive committee approval is required to pay for any services costing $5,000 or more unless the full board previously authorized the expense. Are we ready for a vote?
I have a point of clarification, though. I thought the vote was simply on raising it to 5,000, but then we were going to discuss
There never was
services
a
versus consulting. So we're not voting up or down on this until we discuss that.
Okay,
So in other words, it's like, are people, whether or not they approve of the policy, are they more comfortable with 3 or 5?
There never was the finance committee's proposal was never moved. Team has made a motion that includes the figure 5,000 instead.
Right.
So we're going directly, it's an up or down vote on team's proposal, which dovetails off of the
Including
finance. Yeah, it takes the finance committee idea and moves it to 5.
Yes, but we're still going to discuss consulting versus
Well,
services.
no, not
Consensus.
necessarily.
Okay,
So
well,
we were
that's.
just discussing, so if you want to continue discussion, this is where we're going to do discussion.
Okay, I'm
Just so
confused.
everyone does know, it is 4 o'clock, the meeting is over at 5, and we have not gotten to executive director succession planning yet. So just want to throw that out there. We can totally keep discussing if you would like. Or are we ready for a vote? Vote? Okay. So again, I'll read it. Executive committee approval. We'll wait for Rebecca to come in. Executive committee approval is required to pay for any services costing $5,000 or more unless the full board previously authorized the expense. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
We need a show of hands.
Okay. All those in favor, raise your hand.
Michelle. Maggie is yes. Okay. Nose?
Yes.
Okay. Yeses have it.
Passes. Okay. It is adopted. Okay, public comment period. Do you have anyone from the public that would like to comment? Tara, are you seeing anyone online?
Nope.
Anyone here in
Clear.
the meeting? Okay, then I will say let's take a quick 5-minute break. Yes? And then we will come back for 5 minutes. That means 4:15. 5 minutes. That's it.
5 minutes.
Yes.
5
Run.
Right.
Run.
Mhm. I know.
do though, I would like Robert to stay, Robert Ledger, since he is obviously SDX on the committee that's moving us forward. Is the board okay with that?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Is there a motion to go into executive session?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Great, we will go into executive session. Thank you so much.
Sarah has to get all our.
Yeah,
Yes.
sorry,
No,
hot
no,